welcome to my milking parlor. Tammy here from Shady Paddock Farm in Central Texas. I am going to be milking only 3 girls today. That's all I have left in my milk line. I've got 2 that are in their 2nd year of milk, which really aren't given too much at all, and 1 that's newer this year, so she's the major contributor. So we're just getting a little bit of milk, but it's enough to kind of keep us rolling through our somewhat dry period because most of our girls are busy growing babies. They're no longer in the milk line. They've already cut that production back. So like I said, I've got 3 that I'm going to be milking, and during that time I want to talk to y'all about something today that is really sad involving male baby goats, and it's something that I'm noticing more and more of. So I just wanted to put a little message out there and hope that it falls on the correct ears that need to hear it. So let me get started with getting these girls in, and we're going to chit chat about that. All right, let's get Miss Mia in here. She always comes in first. Good morning, Miss Mia. How you doing today, girl? Come on in, girlfriend. Come on. Yep, it's exactly the same as it was yesterday. Yeah, I know. Come on, let's get up there. Up you go. Good job. All right. Okay. Get Miss Mia started up here. All of these girls that are still in the milk line are also in heat, so that's further impacting milk production. But anyway, let's get to the topic at hand. I wanted to talk to y'all about something that I'm seeing more and more of, and that is starving male baby goats. This is not something that's happening because people are being mean, and it is not because they are being intentionally neglectful. It's actually something that's happening because they love their baby goats very much and they're trying to do the best for them. The problem is most of these folks, and this is something, mostly I'm seeing this with Nigerian dwarfs, not because they're more predisposed to suffering from malnutrition and growth retardation, but because they're very popular pets. And so folks that just want a few pets, they're just getting started out, they're new to goats, a lot of times that's what they're going to migrate towards. So these folks who are very well-meaning, and like I said, they love their animals very much, are wanting to do the best for them, and so they go into, whatever forum or social media platform to try to get some good advice on how to best manage these little baby goats that they've purchased. And a lot of times they've purchased Wethers. And they post that on there, and folks will come in, comment after comment after comment. They'll get blasted with male goats should not have goat feed or alfalfa. And they're going to see this over and over and over. It's going to cause urinary calculi. You're going to cause bladder stones. Do not feed male goats alfalfa or goat feed. And it's good advice. However, it's not complete advice. What folks should be saying to these people is, once your babies have completed their very active growth curve, which is usually completed by the time they're about 5 to 6 months old, by that time they should have, if they're getting appropriate nutrition, should have reached about 50%-ish of their adult weight for the breed. But they're not being told that. They're being told to not feed these things to these baby goats. And these people that are brand new to goats don't understand what an appropriate growth curve looks like. They don't understand what an appropriate body condition looks like. And I find myself answering emails from people that are frustrated because they've got these little goats that are plagued with coccidiosis. They are suffering from high worm burdens. They are getting sick with things, dying from pneumonia, just a variety of health issues. And I learned a long time ago, was taught by my mentor, that when you're answering a question from somebody, always ask questions, get more information than what it just looks like, black and white, in the form of their original inquiry. So I always ask everybody that I'm answering anything to do with the goat on, what breed is your goat, how old is it, and how much does it weigh? And in these situations where folks are trying to figure out, why they're having all these ailments with their babies, it becomes extremely obvious to me very, very quickly what their problem is. Because they will say something along the lines of, it's a Nigerian dwarf, and it is 5.5 months old, and it weighs 16 pounds. And immediately I know that they've got a big problem on their hands, because this baby has not been fed appropriately. So then my next question is, what's the current diet? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, well, just pasture, or just grass, hay, and pasture. And that's what we were told to do to avoid urinary calculi. So that's all we've fed them. And sometimes they've picked these babies up when they were 6 or 8 weeks old, which is also the beginning of the problem, because if they didn't come home on a bottle at 6 to 8 weeks old and stay on that bottle until, I'm going to use Nigerians because, like I said, this is who I see it the most in, although I do see it in other breeds sometimes, but a Nigerian should be on a bottle until it weighs 20 pounds. People are really bad about weaning by weeks instead of by weight. And you get yourself into all kinds of pickles because everybody has an opinion on how many weeks is best. 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the magic number is. But if we can focus on a number of pounds of weight, then we know that that baby has had appropriate nutrition and has gotten to a size big enough so that it's okay to come off of that very concentrated, nutrient-rich supply that comes from that milk. But too often, folks they want to get these little male baby goats moved off the farm because they're not going to do anything for the farm except add to the feed bill. So they're wanting to get them moved quickly, and they're 6, 7 weeks old, and they're eating a little bit of hay on a pretty regular basis, so they're good to go. So they send them on their way to these people that have, oh my goodness, that's Neri, she's in heat, sorry guys. But they send them on their way to these brand new people who have gotten this advice not to feed these little boys goat feed or alfalfa, and they're starving them to death. And they're doing it because they think it's the best thing to do, because they're terrified of urinary calculi. If they do any research on it, they have every right to be terrified. It's horrible. And I'm not saying that little baby goats will never get urinary calculi. However, I am saying that you cannot fix one potential problem by creating another problem which is just as horrible. What we need to focus on is making sure that these babies have an appropriate amount of nutrition to continue an appropriate growth curve during their first 5 or 6 months of life, when they have that really active growth happening. And during that time, they actually require somewhere between 16% protein to keep up with the energy demands that they need to grow appropriately. So we can do that by providing them with alfalfa hay, which is very high in protein compared to most grass hay. Some people have grass hay that's a little higher, up in the 11, 12 range, but The alfalfa hay is going to be much higher in protein in general than grass hay, and it's also going to provide a nice amount of calcium for those actively growing bones. In addition, we can also put in some 16% goat feed. Now, you want something that is balanced with calcium and phosphorus. We're looking for a 2-to-1 ratio, and most commercial goat feeds are going to automatically be balanced, but I usually do look at that. A lot of them have ammonium chloride added to them, which is great. And then what we want to do, instead of just giving them copious amounts of that, is we want to measure how much. So when I hear of someone who has a goat that is 4 months old and has had urinary calculi, I always ask, what have you been feeding them? And when they say grain, I ask, is that a commercially prepared goat feed, or are you mixing grains? And that's an important distinction to make, because whole grains are very high in phosphorus compared to our commercial feeds that are balanced with our calcium and phosphorus. In addition, whole grains are also very low in protein in general. So it's not the best food for these growing babies in twofold. It's not enough protein, it's very high in phosphorus, and phosphorus is a contributor to urinary calculi. If they tell me that they've been on a commercially prepared feed, I want to know how much. The answer usually is something like, well, a really big scoop every day, or I just leave it out. Don't do that. There's all kinds of problems that can come from just leaving copious amounts of goat feed out that we won't get into today. But you need to monitor the amount, keep control of the amount of food that you're giving these babies. So usually 1.5% of their body weight I'm sorry, I'm talking and you ran out of food, is going to be enough to kind of keep up with those nutritional needs and help them thrive as they're growing. They're building, during that first 6 months of life, they are building their immune system. They are growing muscles. They're growing bones. They are having to fight off parasites that have been introduced to them out on pastures. There's all kinds of stressors. They're being probably moved from one farm to another. It's a high amount of stress. There's all kinds of stress. So we want to make sure that we are giving these babies appropriate energy to grow, to thrive, not just to stay alive, to thrive. There are some people that can wean these babies at a certain age. And, the longer, like I said, the longer they're on milk, the better. But they can get them weaned off at, 18, 20 pounds and put them out on pasture with nothing more than grass hay, and they do fine. But we need to look at what kind of scenario they actually have on their farm. One farm does not mirror another in what's available nutrient-wise. The quality of hay that we purchase is very different, and that's another thing we need to think about. New people, you probably do not know how to evaluate a bale of hay to make sure that it's a good quality hay. So, someone that has high protein mix of forage growing out in their pastures, or a whole ton of browse available, those babies could potentially do just fine. The problem is we're dealing with new people, and new people, like I mentioned, do not understand about what a growing baby looks like when they're growing healthy. And that's how they end up in these situations with these kids that are 5, 6 months old and they weigh 15, 16, 17 pounds. I expect my Nigerian dwarfs to weigh 20 pounds by the time they're somewhere between 9 and 12 weeks. So you take that information and you put it next to someone who has a 5.5-month-old that weighs 16 pounds. That's a big problem. It's a really big problem. And those babies, they are so compromised because they just haven't had enough food given to them. So, what do we want to look at to make sure that these kids are growing appropriately? for Nigerian dwarfs, which is the breed that I raise, we are looking at a gain of about 4 ounces a day for the first 10 to 12 weeks of life, right around that 4 ounces a day. We want them to double their weight by the time they're 2 weeks of age, and they should weigh 20 pounds by the time they're 10 to 12 weeks old. Like I said, I have some that hit it at 9 weeks. It just depends on how much milk mama is producing. Then I'm expecting them to hit about 50% of their adult weight by the time they're about 6 months old. You know, just keep an eye on what's happening with the growth. Make sure that we're not overfeeding. So what I will typically do is I'll start weaning out that grain ration, goat feed. When I say grain, I'm talking about goat feed, commercially prepared goat feed. I will start weaning that out when they are probably, for me, for my goaties, usually by the time they're about 4 months old, I'll start weaning that out, but I leave them on the alfalfa hay until they hit about 50% of their adult weight. So everyone will come up with, you know, a regimen that works best for them. I also want to make sure that they have a good loose goat mineral out, and we always want to make sure that they have plenty of fresh, clean water. That is and people don't talk about this when it comes to urinary calculi, but being dehydrated, not enough water intake is a huge contributor to the formation of urinary calculi, no matter how balanced your diet is. We want to make sure that they also have supply to fresh, clean water all the time. Bottle babies, I know it's kind of a pain in the rump to try to bottle feed these kids until they're 12, 13, 14 weeks old, whatever, but keep them on the bottle until these little Nigerians, until they hit 20 pounds. You know, we're looking roughly at about a third of their adult weight. It's going to benefit them so much more. It's very concentrated nutrition that bypasses the rumen. It goes straight into the true stomach and is utilized almost completely. It doesn't go through and get broken down and have to go through all of that like goat feed or browse or anything that, you know, that they're consuming in solid form. It's very well utilized, and they get a lot out of small volume. They get a lot nutritionally out of a small volume. So keep them on the milk until they are about 20 pounds. If you have purchased them from somebody that has weaned them too early, especially if they were dam raised and they've taken them away from the mama too early, it's next to impossible to get those kids to go on a bottle at all. You're going to be stuck with just trying to make sure that you can get enough nutrition into them with a good 16% protein goat feed and alfalfa hay. We're going to transition them over to grass hay when they are about 50% of their adult weight, because that growth curve, that really rapid growth curve, slows down around 6 months for most breeds. Nigerian dwarfs, it absolutely does. So let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything I wanted to point out. I think I hit everything that I wanted to make sure I didn't miss. Oh, I did have one more thing I wanted to talk about. If you are seeing this and you have a little baby that's very small, and it's not normal for these goats to be, air quotes, small for breed, that there's a breed standard for a reason, and all of our goats should be pretty close to that. I mean, sometimes you get some larger breeds mixed in our unregistered populations, and we may have goats that are bigger, but it is not normal and it is not healthy for a 5-6 month old Nigerian dwarf to weigh 15 or 20 pounds, guys. So please keep that in mind. So if you have a little goat that is way behind on their growth curve and you haven't been feeding them appropriately, you can, I'm sorry girl, I know, I'm talking, I'm not paying attention, you're running out of food. failing on the job. But if you still have some time to try to turn things around. Now, once they get close to 6 months, the major part of their overall growth has gone. They're going to continue to grow. It's not just going to be super rapid. You may never have a goat that gets to appropriate size, but you can still have a goat that is healthy or healthier just by getting the nutrition into them and getting them to a good body weight. But I can't tell y'all firmly enough how important good nutrition is to the health and longevity of your pet goats. We get these little goats because we want them to be members of our family. We want them to live long, healthy lives, and we want to do the best for them. So we need to start with a good nutritional foundation. You can't do it willy-nilly. There is a risk of urinary calculi. And by the time these guys are adults, they do not need alfalfa and commercial goat feed in their diet on a regular basis. I'm not saying never use it. And there's some people that use a lot of it and say they never have any problems. And there are people that, most of the ones that I hear that from, are people that have very good management strategies in place in their herds. That's not something that our average backyard goat owner is going to have. You are keeping these animals as pets. The way you raise them is going to be different than someone who is managing them for a business. I know people will say they do it all the time, they don't have problems. The other thing that we have to realize is, there's different things, like I mentioned already, on different properties that do or don't contribute to risk factors when we're talking about urinary calculi. So that being said, most male goats are going to do fine on browse, pasture, and a really good quality grass hay, and a good goat mineral. There are times when adult goats need that extra protein in their diet. When they are recovering from a high worm burden, they've been dewormed, they need that extra protein to kind of help boost their body back and rebuild those red blood cells and rebuild that muscle that may have been lost during that worm burden. If they are suffering from some sort of illness, they've gone down with pneumonia or, some other type of illness has impacted them, that's a good time to think about adding some extra protein into their diet to help them recover. Goats that are in really heavy rut, sometimes they're more worried about finding a girlfriend than they are about eating, and they can lose body condition pretty fast. So sometimes those goats need an extra boost. If the goat needs it in their diet, we need to feed it to them. We need to, again, monitor how much we're feeding, and it's not something that we're going to do willy-nilly long term. You get the goat back to where they need to be, and you wean them back off of it and get them back to their normal diet. So that's my 2 cents on all of those things surrounding feeding baby goats. But please, work with your mentor, work with your veterinarian, stay on top of keeping an eye on how much your baby's growing, and it'll sneak up on you, especially if you're new. So make sure you have a mentor that understands about appropriate growth curves and what a baby goat, a growing baby goat, should look like. Anyone who raises a healthy herd of goats is going to know when they see a 4 or 5 month old baby goat that is half the size it should be. They're going to see that and know something's not right, and they're going to help you get that figured out. So if you have any questions or comments, park them down below, and I hope that this finds the people that it needs to find. We are the advocates for our animals, and it's up to us to make sure that they have everything they need to stay healthy. So just remember, we need to find that happy medium. Okay, you guys have an absolute wonderful weekend, and I'll see you again soon.